Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, Senior Editor at Forbes. In 2025, more than 16 billion login credentials were stolen through cyber attacks, according to cybernews.com. Our next guest is helping protect companies and their customers against these very attacks. He is Brian Dye. He's the CEO of Corelight. Brian, thanks so much for joining us.
Maggie, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So, some folks may not have heard of Corelight. It is an open source company that has its roots in academia, but can you give us the 60-second elevator pitch?
Of course, Corelight helps defend the world's most critical networks by ensuring attackers have no place to hide. And what we really do, if you think about defending an organization, right? Think of it like an egg. You want to start at the shell, right? Prevent the attacker from getting in. It turns up attackers have found ways through that shell in many cases. So then we really help give visibility to what's going on within the egg, right? Once that attacker's in there trying to move around, trying to get their target, whether that's ransomware, where they're actually stealing data and trying to actually hold it for ransom, or whether it's a nation state adversary, we actually help them really get that visibility so the attacker can't hide inside the network.
How do you do that? And how does the open source roots of Corelight help you do that, if at all?
The open source roots are actually a great foundational story because the company was never intended to be a company, right? The entire open source project started as a postdoc who was working in the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, a PhD postdoc. He was studying networks and how they behaved. And so he wrote this little tool, this little utility to help him do his work. It turns up that, can you tell me what's happening on my network, is shockingly useful to a really, really wide range of people. Whether you're running an IT network, whether you're trying to secure an IT network, whether you're researching that network, everybody wants that data. So this little utility became its side project, and then it started getting used across the national labs through the Department of Energy, and then it moved into the Department of War and the high-end financials, even in the intelligence community, into U.S. allies and beyond. So it kind of had this life of its own and kind of got expanded, and it was being funded by the National Science Foundation for the better part of 15 years. And eventually the National Science Foundation said, this is great, it's really successful. We are not in the business of being an ongoing support mechanism for software projects. You all need to find an economic vehicle to be successful. And that actually forced the creation of the company because we needed an economic vehicle to support what is now a community of over 300,000 security professionals that rely on this tool and the data and the insight it generates on a day-to-day basis. So that was the nucleus of the company, taking this idea of, hey, everybody needs to know what's happening inside your network, but that with so many people that are using it, it needs an economic entity to make sure it's durable and helping all those folks, not just commercially, but the free users within the community as well.
So you are not the founding CEO. You came in and took over for the founders. You have experience at McAfee and Symantec. What made you join a relative startup? It has its roots in maybe a time that makes the company mature enough that we can't call it a startup. But what made you join from established tech companies to a startup?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was definitely a startup at the time. We had 30 people. We had $2 million of revenue. That is the definition of a startup. One with a great open source community, but certainly still a startup. For me, it was simple. From a personal standpoint and a career standpoint, I had done larger scale things. I had worked in established companies. But I live in Silicon Valley, and I hadn't done a technology startup in Silicon Valley. That's a bit like being in the Air Force and not being a pilot, right? Go to where the action is. So let's go tackle that. And then when I looked at the ecosystem, there were 200 cyber startups within commuting distance of my house, right? I live in the middle of the peninsula in Palo Alto. So if you just look San Jose to San Francisco at that time, there were over 200. And I wouldn't say I talked to every single one of them, but I talked to a pretty fair chunk. And I knew enough about the industry to kind of analyze it. And what really drew me to Corelight was four things. I call them the 4 Ps. Number one, there was really clearly a problem, right? This idea of really advanced nation state attackers being hard to detect with current technology. Organizations were starting to make investments in what are called threat hunting teams, right? A lot of security relies on the blinking red light. An alert went off, go investigate that alert. The idea behind threat hunting is the alert didn't go off, but there's somebody in there anyway. So can we go find them, right? So we saw people betting with headcount, right? They were making an organizational investment. And when they did so, they were really relying on this open source technology. So there's this product market fit proof, of these 300,000 people in the open source community. But then beyond that, there was so much potential. There were all these adjacent technologies, adjacent tools that we knew we could get into, because if you're going to go bet on a small company, you don't want to bet on a one-trick wonder, right? From a career standpoint, that's not entirely brilliant. I wanted to make sure that there was something that could grow into a really enduring, impactful company. You need enough adjacent markets, enough TAM to go and tackle that. And then the last one was just the people. And I give a lot of credit to Greg Bell, who's the founding CEO and the founders of the open source project, Vern, Robin, and Seth, who all know their names. They had created a company that was so unlike other cybersecurity companies, right? One of the hazards of our industry is there's way too many folks kind of beating their chest and talking about how they're perfect and how they've got everything sorted. This is kind of the opposite of that. It's a really humble group. We serve incredibly elite organizations, and we try to do so from that perspective.
You mentioned incredibly elite organizations. Did I read that you work with a number of government agencies and the Department of Defense? Is that correct?
Yeah, about 70% of our business is what I'll jokingly say where private companies aren't supposed to sell. So think about the biggest critical infrastructure providers in the world, banks, energy companies, things like that. Think about the intelligence community, the defense departments, the energy departments at the U.S. and U.S. allies, right? Between the U.S., what are called the Five Eyes, right, which are our intel partners, NATO, and many of the U.S. allies within NATO. Good chunk of those are actually customers. So it's really unusual. Most private cyber companies start in the mid-enterprise and work their way up. Corelight's the unusual company that started in the very large enterprise and gov, and we're working our way down.
And did those large enterprises come from those 300,000 security professionals who were using the open source technology, or do you look at those as kind of independent sets?
It was about a mix, actually. So it's about a 50-50 split in the history of the company, right? The open source project is called Zeek, which is neither here nor there, but it makes the acronym easy. So half of our customers traditionally were aware of the open source. It's hard to make it scale, hard to make it performant. They needed a commercial alternative. The other half we call zero to Zeek. They had never heard of it before, but once they realize that all the cool kids are using it, like, oh, wait, this is really powerful and here's why, and these other defenders are using it, then they want to come on board and do that too. And it's a lot easier to start with the commercial alternative than it is with the open source per se.
Well, I ask because I heard you say in an interview that the scale and speed of these attacks and the sophistication of the attacks that we're seeing in late 2025, early 2026 are such that it's not just the most elite companies or organizations or governments in the world. It is everybody, all the way down to maybe small, medium enterprises. Is that your experience in talking to customers these days?
It's absolutely what's happening. So if you think about what we as commoners are on all the advantages we're getting from all these Gen AI tools, right? Whether you use Gemini or OpenAI, whatever, right? I was working on a keynote for the company's kickoff coming up shortly. That keynote used to take me 3 weeks. Now it took me 4 hours. Wonderful acceleration. Only problem is the attackers are getting the same advantage, right? It used to be, and we heard this in a customer advisory board just last month, it used to be that a new vulnerability, right, a flaw in software that attackers are using to exploit, the time from a vulnerability to an exploit, actually using it, used to be about 3 weeks. Now it's about 3 hours. So we had multiple customers that had the story of, oh, it used to be 3 weeks, now it's 3 hours. And by the way, in the 72 hours it took us to patch that, we got attacked 23,000 times. So they were having a person that was sitting there just at a console, stop attack, stop attack, stop attack, stop attack for 72 hours, literally trying to shut stuff down. And what's going on? The Gen AI models are helping the attackers do these exploits faster, and it's helping them fill their skill gaps, right? What used to be these incredibly advanced attacks now get sedimented down and are easier to adopt by your kind of more run-of-the-mill attackers, right? Because they have career paths, by the way, just like the rest of us. So that's really what's happening.
We need an attacker for this C-suite series and figuring out how do you go from baby attacker to CEO attacker. But you mentioned the red light going off kind of as the warning. Where in the process of an attack does Corelight come in? Or is the value proposition on the detection? Is it on the fixing, patching the breach?
Yeah, we're on the detection and response side. So if you think about protection, there's a lot of great technologies and great companies that are focusing on that problem. Because going back to the egg analogy, you do want a firm shell. If you can't take out the broad-based swath of internet noise, which, as you said earlier, is in the billions range, that has to be fully automated, fully machine-driven, right? That's got to be automatic. Once you're inside, there's a different class of behavior you're trying to detect. To use an example, there's a technique that's become a lot more common now called living off the land. Because as an attacker, you want to be as stealthy as you can once you got in. Gives you time to kind of figure out what's on the network. Almost think of it like someone who's casing your house, right? The thief that wants to case your house doesn't want you to know they're casing your house, right? So they want to go in, be very quiet, be very stealthy. The best way to do that is to use the tools the company is already using. Now you can't tell what's an attacker and what's just a legitimate employee. So we help detect that anomalous activity that's happening within the network. And then once that attack happens, now you have to figure out the entire path. Because you're not just, think about again, back to that house break-in analogy. You're not just looking at your safe. Let's pretend we all have safes. Dated analogy, but hang with me. Let's pretend we had a safe. You don't just want to know how they broke into your safe. You want to know how they got into your house. Mm-hmm. You want that whole path that kind of led them there. And so we help trace all the breadcrumbs back. To make that maybe a little more concrete, we had a customer about a year and a half ago that was under a ransomware attack. And it turns up there's no honor among thieves. The ransomware attacker claimed to have taken all this data, and that was why it was a threatening attack to the board and why they had this, $10 million ransomware demand. Because we could actually tell them where the attacker did and did not go, that customer could prove that the attacker had only stolen about 10% of what they said they did.
Wow.
And that 10% actually wasn't that brand damaging, so it gave them the confidence, not just within the technical team, but up to the board and the CEO to say, hey, we're calling your bluff, we're not paying the ransom, we're walking away. So that difference between I think and I know is incredibly valuable in this space.
So when I, as a customer, have gotten emails from retailers or restaurants or sites that have my personal data and they are reporting a breach, but they say, we know it's only 200,000 of you, or if they give any sort of disclosure about the scope of the attack, is it likely that that data is coming from you?
I don't want to over-attribute to us, but that is a big problem that we're trying to solve, because if you think about someone who's been attacked, and there's a bunch of SEC disclosure regulations and everything that goes with this, if they can't prove a smaller scope of disclosure, they have to default to a much bigger one. So if you think about how cybersecurity translates from the technical domain up into the leadership team and the board, it really is a brand damage and a disclosure scope problem. Because again, that difference between I think and I know could be the difference between notifying 1,000 people and notifying 20 or 30,000 people. And so it really is about kind of getting the smallest scope of disclosure, and you just have to have the confidence of the ground truth data of what's happening behind that.
Is there a common vulnerability you see among Corelight's customers, or the people who come to you say, hey, I need your help? I mean, we talked about the speed of the attacks, the sophistication of the attacks. But as you're looking at companies and organizations across the world, can you say, hey, everyone is really terrible with their firewalls? Or is there a common symptom?
We have such a privilege to serve really, really elite defensive organizations. I would be doing them no service if I said any of them were weak or incapable. Because bear in mind, these are folks with hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people in their security team. They're quite sophisticated. The biggest two problems that people wrestle with, one is the IT industry itself, right? The IT industry, especially in the last 18 months, has shipped too many products with their own vulnerabilities that then attackers use to bypass all the other security defenses. That's a really hard problem. So again, you're breaking through the shell of the egg and now you're in the yolk, right? Which is why they need our help. The second one, I hate to say it, is us. It's you and me. A common theme I hear from customers is the weakest part of their network is the carbon-based part, right? That would be the breathing people, us, because we click on links we shouldn't, right? That's a big way that attackers get in. And back to your point on AI earlier, they are absolutely using AI to get more effective at social engineering. It is really savvy, and they can do so much effective research down to, audio spoofs, video spoofs even, bypassing help desks. The human side of this is an incredibly hard to patch vulnerability.
It's really hard, and this might not ever cross your desk, but on my social feeds, I've seen over the past few weeks and months, people talking about, I got a call from my bank saying that there was a fraudulent transaction, and the number matched what I thought was my bank's number, so I took the call, and then they kind of go down the path of answering the questions that the person on the other line is asking. And the savvy ones realize, hey, my bank would never actually ask me these questions. But some of these attackers on the consumer side are so sophisticated that some people get to the end of the call and that only then have the, oh my God moment.
Well, and as a quick yes and, this is one of my favorite funny Corelight stories. I warn new employees that they will likely get what's called a smishing attack, right? A text message claiming to be from me, asking to approve a PO or get them gift cards, usually within the first 30 days.
Wow.
That's how long it takes, because folks go post their new jobs on LinkedIn. The attackers are scraping LinkedIn for new job opportunities. And my favorite part is sometimes I will also get those smishing attacks. So I will get text messages claiming to be from myself.
Well, at least you know that you didn't do that.
Pretty straightforward to figure that one out.
That's a good warning. So was there an employee who fell victim to one of those smishing and therefore you have to warn everyone?
Fortunately, we do not fall victim to those. We take our anti-phishing training quite seriously. And because we're a cyber provider, you get pretty cyber savvy folks. I'm not saying we're perfect. We're not, by the way. But no, it's one of those times when it's a good thing where employees see it, they ask me or they ask our security department, or they ask our peers, and they very quickly are told, oh, of course, that's not Brian. And we have an open enough culture that my cell phone's on the directory just like anyone else. So if you want to look it up and see if it's me, you have a pretty easy way to do that.
But kind of on that note, I wonder, do you have like a 10-question security Q&A that you have is a screener for all potential employees?
We don't rely on that as a screen. We rely on as education once folks come on board. Because if you think about the obligation that we have to our customers, right? If you're providing security software to some of the largest and most sophisticated defensive organizations in the world that have hundreds to thousands of people, we can't be the weak link in their chain, right? That is that is a company-ending risk for us. So we take our employee training really seriously. We take our ongoing kind of patching and our updates really seriously. I often look at customers and think about the staffing ratios they have. So for example, you can look at how savvy an organization is in their cyber defense by saying, hey, what percentage of revenue do you spend on IT? And what percentage of IT do you spend on security? Pretty easy math. It turns out for us that number's inverted, right? So we actually spend 4 times more on cyber than we spend on the rest of IT, right? That's the level of priority we give that. Cyber spending would be a quarter of IT, not the other way around.
Should more companies be taking your model and inverting that?
I'd be hard pressed to make that recommendation, especially to organizations at scale, right? Because as you grow, let's take a high-end bank, right? That's doing a lot of application development in-house, right? Their IT organization, in many cases, looks like our engineering organization, right? Because they're developing the products that the bank is shipping to you and I as end customers, right? So you kind of have to think about that ratio a little bit differently. It'd be hard pressed to say your security organization should be bigger than your engineering organization, right? To use that ratio. So I think people do need to take it seriously, but I don't, in many cases, what's holding folks back is less about this overall staffing ratio. It's more about the willingness and the culture of the company to really embrace this. And to give a quick sidebar if it's useful, we have a big university in the south of the U.S. that's a customer of ours. That's not just a university; they actually act as a service provider to a bunch of the schools, the other schools, and even the educational system in that state. We call them MSSPs, Managed Security Service Providers. The biggest organizational win they had was to get the provost of the colleges to treat cyber as a priority to everyone else. They could not be anywhere as effective. Even though they have a very healthy staff and really good technology, they actually bring in the undergrads into their cyber program. They're doing everything right. But even with that, if they didn't have the support of the provost to make cyber culturally important and actually the lines of business, right, the other schools within that university, they wouldn't be able to achieve the results they have.
That's interesting. I want to get back to hiring and leadership questions, but before we started recording, you and I were talking about an experience that you had at a customer advisory board meeting in 2022, and it kind of goes back to the questions about how AI is changing the landscape. I heard you talk about this in another interview, and it's so interesting. You were having this meeting with the customer advisory board, and someone raises their hand and talks about how they're using ChatGPT in conjunction with Corelight, and it was kind of a meeting-stopping moment. Can you talk about how ChatGPT has changed your business or customers' use of it?
Oh, I'd love to. And it's not ChatGPT, it's all of the big foundation language models, right? So the story you're referring to was literally in March of 2022. So this is a few weeks after GPT 3.5 really hit the wire, kind of public awareness went through the roof, adoption was going through the roof. I hadn't even opened the thing at that point, right? So I can take zero credit for anything that's about to come out of my mouth here. So we were on this advisory board meeting, and again, high-end financial customer, very early adopter of technology. We were trying to talk about machine learning and advanced analytics and all the blinky red light stuff. And she stopped us and said, I thought you all should know that my analysts are using GPT 3.5 to automatically drive security investigations using the insight Corelight provides. And as you said, that was a meeting-stopping moment because we're all like, what did she just say? We need to learn more. This is awesome. And what happened is, and I've said this multiple times, I've never worked in a company with an open source business model before. And it turns out open source is the gift that keeps on giving. How did this work? The large language models are all trained on the public internet. We're open source. There is almost 30 years of not just open source product documentation and Reddit threads and community forums and all this stuff that these large language models are already trained on. So we did not have to pay NVIDIA a whole bunch of money to go do custom model training to get this, kind of large language model compatibility. Whether you're talking about OpenAI and ChatGPT or Llama or Gemini or any of these big foundation models, they've all been trained out of the box on what Corelight does. And I'd love to tell you that we had some master stroke of strategy to go and enable this. We just got dumb and lucky. But I'll take it, right? Because it's really helping our customers take advantage of the automation that these large language models provide to give them the defender's leverage and the defender's advantage, because we know the attackers are using it, like we talked about before. So the defenders can now use these language models out of the box, independent of all the things we're doing to help them, to go and automate their response, which is just incredibly important to match the cadence and speed of the automation the attackers are driving.
Is there a risk that this combination of open source plus ChatGPT, Gemini, et cetera, robs you of potential customers? Or maybe it's a small business, they don't have the money to pay you outright, so they send a junior level employee to play around on OpenAI and build their own code or build their own security model. Is that a risk factor?
Not a risk factor at all for us in this industry. So if you think about the challenge that our customers have, every one of them, whether they have hundreds or thousands of people, getting more out of those people and handling more of the inbound attack volume and being deeper into their risk stack is their number one problem. So I've not talked to a single customer, a single defender who says, I can adopt AI and I can hire less people. I have not heard those words out of a single human being.
Has anyone said, I can adopt AI and I don't need to work with you?
Oh, no, not at all. Because what they need, think about how that 3 weeks to 3 hours conversation we had earlier. If you used to have weeks and now you have hours to respond, the only way to solve that problem is to automate the daylights out of your response. So we have customers today, and by the way, that automation needs the right data. They need that ground truth of what's actually happening to find that attacker. Think about what you can get out of ChatGPT if you don't give it any context about you or what you're trying to solve. You'll get generic ideation, but you're not going to get anything useful you can use. It's horrible. Exactly. Same thing is true in cyber, right? If you do a very set of generic questions to a large language model, even one that's been tuned for cyber, you don't get much useful. You get general guidance. If you give it unique data about your environment, now it can do something interesting. We're a data provider into these large language models, and we take advantage of that compatibility. And our customers absolutely need to be doing extreme automation to keep up with these cadence of attackers. And to put a number on that, kind of, again, this is live from a customer advisory board just a couple months ago. We have customers today who are automating the response to 95% of their inbound threats on a 15-second SLA. That's how fast you have to go, and that's what percentage you have to automate to try and keep up when the attackers are doing the same thing.
Terrifying if you spend too much time thinking about it.
Yeah. That's why they have the big job.
I want to transition to your journey to CEO, because you did not start at this company as CEO. You joined running product. It can be hard to take over for a founder CEO. Did you have pause?
I didn't, because, and boy, you're 100% right. There's all sorts of stories of very challenging either founder chemistry or very challenging CEO transitions. And I can give 100% of the credit to the successful transition we had to Greg Bell, who is the founding CEO, because he's one of those rare people that has an incredible combination of IQ and EQ. And he had always said to himself and to the board, I will take myself out of this chair before you do. And we were at a point, we were passing through about 20 million of revenue. And he said, look, we're evolving from fly by sight to fly by numbers. And he said, look, I don't want to fly by numbers. I want to fly by sight. I want to be in the fight. I don't want to be building systems and scaling. I want to be in the action, kind of, in with customers, in with the community. That's what gets him excited. And the first thing we tried to do, myself included, was talk him out of that. Because bear in mind, this is the middle of COVID. Company loves him, high amount of personal loyalty. We're in the middle of COVID. We need a CEO transition like I need a hole in my head, right? Like, no thanks. And my comment to Greg was, look, this is not going to be a challenge. I can whisper into your ear everything you need to know to scale this company for the next 2 years. Stay in the seat. And he said, Brian, I love you. No. Right? And he turns up, he was brilliant on two levels. One is that he had the EQ to help drive a really successful transition. So again, credit to him. And two is the more commodity job is the CEO job. You can hire a recruiting firm and screen a bunch of candidates and put them in the cage ring and see who wins. Happy I got the board's confidence on that, but it's a process. He was leading our strategy function and our open source community development efforts. That is a much harder job to fill, actually, because open source communities, you don't just go recruit someone and drop them in. That's an earned position of respect. And the fact that he had been such a native member of that community for the past 10, I think even 15 years, that is a much harder skill set and credential to replace than it is the CEO. And so both of those things, I think, really work to make that transition really elegant. But again, I give so much of the credit to Greg here.
It's a really interesting story because I think it can be hard for some founders to let go of the CEO position and to have the insight to know this is my baby, but I'm better spent doing this strategic project and bringing someone in to run as CEO. And I think that's good advice for anyone. And I've heard you say you were in an interesting situation when you took over as CEO because you somehow found yourself hiring for 4 direct reports at the same time. Would you look back on that as a mistake?
Well, let's break down the 4. One was replacing myself. One was we had a new sales leader, which happens, that is a common thing as you scale. And then I had 2 of my direct reports decide to retire without knowledge of the other one within the same 5 calendar days. So I kind of couldn't help but be in the situation. The piece that was absolutely a mistake was I tried to parallel path too many of those recruitments. And if I had to do that over again, I would have been a little more serialized and just put a lot more effort between, let's say, 2 of those roles, rather than trying to do 4 recruitments in parallel, especially at the executive level where you've got to put a lot of time and effort into really deeply understanding the person, assessing cultural fit, really understanding what you're buying, right, from a hiring standpoint. And especially the culture piece is critical. Doing 4 of those in parallel was soul crushing. That was actually really hard. And I think if I had to do that again, I would have picked 2 of them and just put a triage plan in place for the other 2 and said, look, I'm going to park these. I'm going to put interim leaders in place or whatever for a 6-month period so I can put all of my effort on the first 2. So if I had something to do over again, of the many mistakes I've made, I would definitely I couldn't get out of the situation, but I would handle how I tackled the recruitment differently.
What are the other mistakes that you would go back in time and fix or advise yourself to fix?
Want the long list or the short version?
The number 1 or 2.
The number 1, I think if the biggest thing I've learned professionally at Corelight over the nearly 8 years I've been there is I have overhauled how I hire people 3 different times since I was here.
Really?
Yes. I thought I knew how to hire. I'd led big teams, 2,500 folks, kind of multiple different functions. I thought I understood how to hire. That was, when you're in a bigger company and you're not growing at hyper speed, the amount of hiring you do is radically lower, and you have a huge talent ecosystem you're pulling off of. So a bunch of folks are internal transfers. You have a wonderful ability to really get a complete 360 on that person because they're part of your internal labor ecosystem, right? You can triangulate incredibly easily. Let's compare that to when you're trying to be a 30-person company and double it, right? You want to go from 30 to 60 people. You got to hire 30 people. You're probably interviewing 5 people for each of those. And let's say that you do, at a bare minimum, 3 interviews. So now you got 15 interview spots for 30 people. That's 450 interviews. How many of those 30 employees you think are good interviewers? It's not all 30 of them. It's probably 10. So now your 10 good interviewers are doing 45 interviews apiece as you try to double the company. So you get really good at interviewing and really good at hiring really quick because you're just doing it a ton, right? You're getting a lot of reps at that exercise. And by the way, you're going to be working incredibly closely with these people, and every single one of these hires is consequential to what you're driving, especially in those early stages. Frankly, I would argue even north of 500 people now, it's really, every person's still critical as we bring them on board. So the ability to really rigorously assess cultural fit, the ability to be super open-eyed on what's this person's incredible strength and where can we help them grow, kind of where is this still a good career opportunity for them, and how is this person stage appropriate for where we are? Because what you need at 2 million versus 50 million versus 100 million plus are often different things. Being so much more aware of every stage of that. If I could give my old self at 8 years ago the interview skills I have right now, we would be even better as a company for sure.
That's really interesting. Has the landscape of hiring, and here AI enters the conversation again, also affected your outlook and style in interviewing and recruiting? Because we see all the time people using both AI to generate a resume or an application, and on the flip side, recruiters are using AI to screen, and it can create a bit of a mess. Are you entangled in that?
A mess is a perfect description of that state. Yeah, I've even had people, because aggressive candidates will just write me directly. They'll guess of what my email address is, and they'll try to write me directly. I think it was just 2 weeks ago, I had 3 different candidates for the same job write me a letter, and they must have been using the same AI tool because the letters were shockingly similar and clearly auto-generated. Yeah, so there's a lot of noise in there. You have to cut through the noise. That's just part of the cat and mouse game of kind of these different tools working together. But I think the 2 biggest things that have been impactful for us is the hiring markets move with the stock markets, right? So, gross unemployment will dictate, how aggressively people are looking or not. So, we think of it as what's your buy to sell ratio in an interview, right? How hungry is the candidate for the job based on how the rest of the job market is? Over the last 8 years, that has ebbed and flowed for sure. So that's absolutely there. But that doesn't change our interviewing tactics, our interviewing approach, right? We're very focused on great athletes that can scale with the company. We're really focused on a great track record. We're really focused on cultural fit. Those are super durable. I don't think those are going to change. The piece that has changed, especially for me at the executive team, is the skill sets you need at 2 million and 100 million are different. Mm-hmm. And so adapting how we think about screening for results and who will return our call, right? The candidate pool that will call you back at and not just will call you back, should call you back, right? At 2 million and 100 million. Those are completely different. So those really do change kind of how we think about recruiting, just because the target pool, both of skill set and of respondents, is different at those sizes.
When you joined, revenue was at 2 million and today it's north of 100 million. What's been the biggest mindset shift you've experienced or had to adopt as CEO as revenue has grown to this level?
Oh, that's an awesome question, by the way. I think for me, it's been a bounce, because bear in mind, if you go before the 2 million, I was leading orgs of north of $1 billion, right? And in the thousands of people. So we went thousands of people to tens of people, now to the mid hundreds of people, right? And what I would say is the biggest shift for me is when you run really large organizations, you have to be ruthlessly effective at direction setting and delegation. And in fact, you have to ask yourself, can anyone else do this thing? Because if anyone else can do this thing, someone else should do this thing. I shouldn't, right? I have to be ruthless about delegating and focus on the things that only I can do, because otherwise you won't scale as a leader. Then you go into a company that's got 30 people, and guess what? You're not delegating. You're doing. You're doing everything. I don't care whether it's, like, again, you mentioned I joined leading products. The day before my CEO promotion, I was in what's called a scrum meeting, right? Where you're in with the engineering team prioritizing individual tickets, right? Tiny sub-features or bug fixes. And I literally, my promotion to CEO was announced that afternoon, right? Because you are doing, right? At a very, very granular level, which I love and appreciate, by the way, because it's given me such a grounding. But then as the company scales, I have to get back into delegation, and not just back into it myself, but I have to help the team around me see that I'm doing this consciously. They have to see that I don't want the decisions to roll up to me. They have to see that I want them to assume authority, to drive initiative, to take that charge, and to be super comfortable that they're not going to be perfect, because I wasn't going to be perfect either, right? One of the great pieces of advice from one of our board members was, I can raise more money, I can't raise more time. And there's an illusion that, look, if I slow down, I'll get it right more often. I don't buy that, right? There is a pace of urgency you can do where you're just being sloppy. Sure, there, slow down a little bit, don't be sloppy. But most of the mistakes we make aren't because we aren't out of time, it's because we don't know, right? Buying yourself more time doesn't help you solve a mistake you can't see coming. And so we're way better off being disciplined, being smart about our decisions, but driving those decisions, encouraging authority, encouraging creativity. Be focused on the customer, be focused on the community, be focused on our fellow Corelighters, for sure. But take the decision and run with it. And I need to help. I've gotten into a mode now where I need to help my team see that I want them to do that, and I don't want the decisions to come back to me, because it's this bounce back towards delegation. But now I've got a brand equity. Some of these folks were working with me when we were 20% of our size, and they've seen me in a very different operating model. So it's like I have to change my own brand image within the company as we scale.
I feel like we could talk about leadership advice for hours, but
we're
coming up on time. So I want to leave you with final thoughts. If we speak 1 year from now, what would you hope to report to the Forbes audience that Corelight has accomplished, or that open source technology has helped the world's organizations and companies do in terms of data protection in a world of increasing cybersecurity attacks?
My team makes fun of me that I always answer things in threes. So I'll try to live true to my brand reputation, to our earlier conversation on that one. I would say three things. First, I would hope that Corelight as a company has continued to do what we're trying to do right now, which is to take this insight and this heritage of serving some of the most elite defenders in the world and continue to bring that insight down to the much broader enterprise, because there's such a lesson learned from those elite defenders that we can package and really benefit the much broader economy, right? So that's number one. Number two, from a community standpoint, to continue to serve and deepen the roots that are helping us in turn be successful, right? So to have the community, because there's a bunch of formerly open source projects that have gone closed source. There's a whole religious set of debates going on about that and have been over the last 5 years. But for our community to see that we still have their back, that would be number two. And number three, I would love to stand here and say that we have successfully created career-defining opportunities for my fellow Corelighters at the company as we continue to grow, because folks don't just join companies because of great missions. And we feel like we have a great mission from a cybersecurity perspective, but they join because they have great opportunities, right? That the culture feels good and they want to grow their careers and learn and come out as better human beings, and that they can continue to drive their careers afterwards. If we as a company can deliver those three things, for our customers, for the community, and for our fellow Corelighters, that'll be a fantastic year.
Brian Dye, CEO of Corelight, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you. Love the conversation, Maggie. Appreciate it.